Morning. It is Sunday, 5th of April, 2026, and today I need to try to talk a little bit more about alchemy, particularly Mircea Eliade, the Forge in the Crucible, Origins and Structures of Alchemy. Okay, so I'm going to be tying in some of the stuff from theurgy to try and make this relevant. So, first of all, what are we sort of talking about here? The relevance of alchemy is sort of having to do with a particular kind of self-recognition that involves a self-recognition of qualities including aliveness and sacredness within matter. And as a result of this self-recognition, which is a kind of self-recognition of a certain kind of emergent awareness, there is an imperative or a calling to intervene in natural processes in a way which fulfills the work of nature. This is a sort of MO of alchemy that I'm laying out right here. So I'm talking about an appropriate kind of intervention within the temporal rhythm of living substances. So how can we work with matter, work with nature in a way that facilitates, in a way that assists, in a way that midwipes an ongoing unfolding process? And there's this sort of combined recognition that something is trying to be born at the moment. So I'm talking about a process that's sort of happening in the evolution of consciousness kind of thing, and the understanding being that if we can allow consciousness to develop in the way that I would say it's trying to, if we can facilitate that process, that it's going to be helpful for human survivability and flourishing and thriving, circa 2026. And accordingly, we can, in a sense, rationally orient ourselves to that. Like I'm talking about a process of sort of like solving the tragedy of the commons, multipolar trap kind of problems by intentionally becoming aware as the commons, recognizing that we are that which is between us. I have to sort of jump through these like very broad orienting points because I have to try and get to the content today. And so the reason for the relevance of alchemy, mining, metallurgy, smithing is partly in diagnosing the origins of like what's gone wrong, but then partly I'm also trying to vaguely orient toward what can actually be done. What is it appropriate to do in this circumstance? So the hypothesis that I'm working with is that there is an unfulfilled there's an uncompleted process which is currently underway that has to do with the evolution of consciousness that could be described as a kind of rebirth of God moment. And I feel that this process has a kind of direct bearing on how things are going for humanity circa 2026, as in I feel that we deeply need this kind of cultural enlightenment, cultural renaissance, a huge part of which involves radical shift in our consciousness. And so to that end, if there were a way to, yes, intervene in that process, what I'm saying is that that process actually cannot be properly fulfilled or completed unless we intervene in the appropriate way. In the sense that, in the same way that a birthing process cannot fully or is most optimally completed, I don't know, with a midwife being involved. Do you know what I mean? It's very difficult to talk about this stuff. Anyway, so that leads us to collaboration with nature. Okay, so what's the relevance of theurgy? Well, theurgy basically talks about theurgy, divine activity communally shared. So it's a series of like rituals and rites that are designed to allow humans to participate directly in the experience of being God. So theurgy is a tradition, like a practical tradition. It's a kind of practical philosophy, if you like, involving a praxis, like a combination of rites and rituals that has to do with the development of the soul, and it has to do with communion with the gods, direct participation in the divine. Alchemy, by contrast, is more about the transformation of matter, which is related but not quite the same. But they're connected here. In what way are they connected? Well, part of the way that this theurgy stuff works is through particular material phenomena, which according to this guy, Iamblichus, articulated in Gregory Shaw's Theurgy and the Soul, there are sort of like particular kinds of gods, including gods associated with matter. So this is the kind of recognition that it's rational and reasonable to recognize spiritual forces at play within matter, and that material rites involving sacrifice, can I don't know what I want to say there, like sort of appropriately honor those forces. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean exactly? What I mean is I'm going to try and use an example because we were talking in this series about meteorites. So there's a certain quality in our, traditionally speaking, in our relationship with meteorites, involving a quality of sacredness. So part of our religious spirit became enmeshed with particular objects. And so the idea here is that those objects are symbols. They represent that which is beyond those symbols. So the divine or the sacred or the celestial or the heavenly. And the relevance of theurgy here is that theurgy involves this practice of, imagine that there's one ritual that's devoted to the god Apollo. Well, that would go along with a song to the god Apollo, and there would be particular clothing that was worn and particular smells that were relevant, and it's a whole like aesthetic vibe, also involving particular objects. And so the idea here is that it's very tricky to pull this stuff down into words. What I'm sort of saying is that um, by looking at the history of our relationship with different metals, we can look at how our relationship with heaven, with that which is held to be sacred or beyond, has changed. I have to try and be even more specific. I'm sort of saying that we've deeply overlooked something. So what I'm saying is that our relationship with metals may have shifted over a very long period of time in a way which is unhealthy. And that these traditions, like smithing, metallurgy, alchemy, they reveal that, they show that. So what I'm saying is that there is an appropriate way to worship by way of matter. I think from there it should be graspable why our relationships with matter and our relationships with special classes of matter, such as metals, could be relevant to participating in the divine. But then there's the further idea that's in some way gone wrong. Very difficult to talk about. that which is sacred became that which is profane, to use one of his key distinctions. So I think that's enough. And what I'm going to do from there is go straight into the second chapter, which isn't super long, but I wanted to give some kind of preamble because otherwise I just sort of jump into this without sort of articulating anything as to why it's relevant. Another way to put all that would be to say that I think we lost the appropriately religious attitude that we used to hold toward metals. It's possible that the sort of sacred significance that used to be attached to metals became transferred to the earth in a way that um, we sort of came to regard metals as simply objects to be used, like material, inert matter to be used as suits us. And that sort of what I'm saying, spiritually speaking, is that we sort of fail to honor and to, again, appropriately worship or collaborate with the gods of matter that the theurgic tradition speaks to directly. And that if we, yeah, and then there's a claim that I'm making is that it would be valuable to sort of straighten that out in terms of spiritual practice. I feel like there's about four arguments that are sort of all tangled together there. But anyway, I'll have to try and practice distilling this as I move through the text and not take too long on it. Aside from sort of my particular orientation to this, I feel that what's relevant is the kind of associational and symbolic thinking that can be drawn from this kind of writing. So it's not in some sense so much about the exact content we talk about, it's more about the way that I'm trying to draw inspiration is difficult. Okay, so what I'm going to do is because it's only a short chapter, it's pages 27 through 33 of the text. It's called Mythology of the Iron Age. I'm going to be quoting Eliade, who's quite the uses a lot of, you'll see what I mean. And then I'll try and talk about each sentence in terms of what it means. Let's get going. Okay, so just briefly on the Iron Age, since that's the period that we're going to be looking at. The Iron Age is roughly 1200 to 600 BCE after the Bronze Age. And so bronze itself is an alloy of copper and tin, and iron can be found naturally, but it's most often also an alloy of iron heated in the presence of carbon, which makes steel. And so there were particular technological advancements that facilitated this transition between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. Iron tools were already known, but then they were more widespread, adopted in a more widespread way because of new hotter furnace technologies. So metalworking became it became easier for metal workers to manage the high melting point of iron. There was improved smelting. They could make steel much more easily. Iron ore became it could be more abundantly accessed. Like we had better access to iron ore in the ground. We made, for example, plowshares, iron plowshares, allowing farmers to cultivate tougher and heavier soils, which allowed us to grow a lot more food and then grow a lot more people. There were other technological advancements like rotary querns for grinding grain, the lathe, and advanced wheel making, which I won't go on about. It was also initially triggered by a bronze crisis because trade routes for tin were disrupted in the Mediterranean around 1300 to 1200 BCE. So we were forced to innovate new solutions, resulting in the Iron Age. Okay, so Eliade states, we shall not dwell at length on the supposedly sacred quality of iron, whether it had fallen from the heavenly vault or had been extracted from the bowels of the earth. It was still considered to be charged with sacred power. Okay, so in the previous chapter, he was talking about how the sacred quality was then transferred from, hey, something fell from the sky, isn't that amazing, to, hey, something came out of the ground, isn't that amazing? But here he's sort of talking about both. So again, this connection between that which is sacred, that which is powerful, and it's in a way it has a precious jewel-like quality. It's like metal it's been hard to attain, right? It's either precious in the sense of having fallen from the sky, there's not much of it, or it was hard to extract from the earth. Quote, even among populations with a high level of culture, we still find this attitude of awe and reverence towards the metal. So what I'm saying is that that metal, that piece of metal, serves as a kind of constellation point. It's a meeting point that allows our awe and reverence to project. You could say project. So the object is like I don't know, it's somewhere where our awe and reverence can be gathered. And is it possible to imagine from there? It's easy to see, I think, how objects of that kind could be crucial for in contexts like initiation ceremonies or shamanic practice, allowing cultures in the individuals that represent those cultures to directly participate in the divine. So those objects facilitate our worship of the gods in a particular way that I understand to be theurgic. And we mess that up, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Quote, and he gives some examples, which I'll go into because why not? He says, it's not very long since the kings of Malaya kept a sacred block of iron, which was part of their regalia, and surrounded it with an extraordinary veneration mingled with a superstitious terror. So this is kind of the love and fear of God was kind of associated with these blocks of iron, for example. And again, this was written in originally 1956, so we have to sort of forgive him for some of the language. He says, by the primitives, ignorant of metalwork, iron tools were venerated even more. The Bil, Bhil, Bil, a quote, primitive people of India, they used to offer their first fruits to the points of arrows obtained from neighboring tribes. It was not a question of fetishism or of the worship of an object in itself or for its own sake. It was not a matter of superstition, but a sacred respect for a strange object outside their own familiar world, an object coming from elsewhere and hence a sign or token of the beyond, a near image of the transcendental, which is exactly the point that I'm trying to make. It's like the rarity and the usefulness of objects such as arrowheads was so much that those objects, it's not that they were worshipped for themselves, is that they were held with a kind of sacred respect because they symbolized the transcendental, the beyond, the divine, the strange. That quality of sacred respect that we held for metals such as arrowheads, for example, was so much that we can see how metals of that kind started to be used in some of the original coinage systems. So metal was regarded as so valuable that it came to be taken as a kind of index of value itself. I'll just keep moving on from there. He said, yeah, so we were just saying that these objects they represent the beyond, they're symbols of the transcendental, so on. Quote, this is evident in cultures which have long been familiar with telluric, meaning non-celestial iron, But the legendary memory of the heavenly metal still persists, as does the belief in its occult marvels. Okay, so that's just bridging, so I'm going to keep going. He says, the Bedouins of Sinai are convinced that the man who is successful in making a sword of meteoric iron becomes invulnerable in battle and assured of overcoming all his opponents. Okay, so this is a particular quality of like military prowess that's come to be associated with the quality of that weapon, right? So this is a mythology, which is sort of saying that if someone can make a sword out of this meteoric iron, they'll be invincible. This is how look how similar that is to like Thor's hammer. It's like, hey, if he can um lift this hammer, then he's worthy to rule Asgard. It's the same kind of thing. Um, there are also other examples of that, like King Arthur, like, hey, whoever can pull this sword from um, that rock, they're they're the king, essentially. It's the same kind of thing. It's like whoever has this particularly intimate association with that which is transcendental, that which is strange, that which is beyond, and um, can manifest that, can show that, um, is worthy of being the ruler, essentially. It continues, the celestial metal is foreign to the earth. Hence, it's transcendent. It comes from up above. That is why, to the contemporary Arab, iron is in the nature of a marvel. It can perform miracles. Okay, so there's a connection here between that kind of material, right? Metal, which literally fell from the sky or was dug out of the deep earth, and the capacity to perform miracles, because it's like in a way that those objects, they become a kind of storehouse of the miraculous, the infinite, the incredulous. It's like when we don't understand what something is, then we sort of leave space for it to be completely beyond our expectations. And so there's a way here that miracles of certain kinds may well be possible, but they may depend strongly on things like placebo, for example. And in that context, there's a way that if a particular object, like a meteorite, for example, if it is completely beyond our ken, and we know it's beyond our ken, it can it becomes charged, it can become charged with a kind of sacred significance that allows it to be involved in processes like miracles, as an example. Like it doesn't surprise me at all that such objects could become to be believed as being able to perform miracles, since they represent God, essentially. Eliade says, this may well be the consequence of a memory heavily weighted with myth and deriving from an epoch when man used only meteoric iron. Here too, we're in the presence of an image of the transcendental. Here too, we're in the presence of an image of the transcendental. The myths preserve the memory of that legendary era when there were men endowed with extraordinary powers, almost demigods. There is a hiatus between these mythical times and historical times proper, and every hiatus of this sort indicates, in the sphere of traditional spirituality, a transcendence which disappeared with the fall. Okay, there's a lot packed into that little paragraph. Basically, the perspective that I want to offer is that by appropriate ritual worship involving material objects that have a certain kind of sacred significance, such as meteorites, but certainly not limited to those, it is possible to actually embody the qualities of the gods. So I'm saying that we've fallen into the myth of linear time. We've fallen out of the orientation to the eternal. And we can and should rationally orient to getting it back. So theurgy is a series of ritual practices that allow us to essentially become like the gods, or you could say allow the gods to be present in this material world. And I'm saying that there are particular objects that are crucial to facilitating that process. So it's not like, look, it's not just a transformation in our mythology. It's something that we've actively forgotten as human beings. There's a couple of dualities which sort of underlie this kind of mythology, such as the eternal and the temporal, or the higher and the lower. And it's this kind of two worlds mythology where we relate to heaven, which is up there, or an eternal and blessed kingdom which used to be, this golden age that was. And that's a kind of story that we've been living in. And the reason that it becomes an issue is because it denies the possibility that we can actually directly participate in that golden age, that's happening now, that the eternal is happening now, and that there are particular practices that can allow us to feel that and get a sense of that and participate in it. And in that vein, embody the qualities of the gods. So I'm talking about direct access to self-transcendence and practices to facilitate self-transcendence. What I've decided to do from there is actually to stop this and to return from it because I want to break this up as much as possible. So I'm halfway through. Yeah, I'm like a page into Mythology of the Iron Age, second chapter in Mircea Eliade, the Forge and the Crucible, Origins and Structures of Alchemy, and I'll come back to more of the sacred significance of iron and how we started to misuse it soon.